For more on the relationship between Germany and the U.S., we're joined by Klaus Larres. He's a professor of history and international affairs, University of North Carolina, and visiting scholar for the Center of European Studies at Harvard University. Good to see you again. The Scholz-Biden meeting was sort of a little bit quicker than I think some people thought. We were expecting maybe more commentary from it. How do you think that meeting went and what was discussed?
Yeah, it was a very surprising visit. It was a quick visit. It lasted for an hour and 20 minutes, a conversation between Biden and Olaf Scholz. And it is difficult to know what was precisely discussed, but we can assume that the Ukrainian war was discussed, that the coming spring offensive by Ukraine will have been discussed, and probably also how eventually the war can be overcome and can be ended. And of course, the Ukrainians need to be on the Western side so that the Ukrainians agree with such a peace deal or peace offer. And all that was discussed. Also the NATO summit, which will come in the summer, will have been discussed. Maybe the Nord Stream 2 explosion, the explosion of that pipeline, and perhaps also, or probably in all likelihood, the China factor in the Ukrainian war will have been discussed.
Right. Let's start with Ukraine. And obviously they're on the same page when it comes to wanting to have peace. But Germany's been criticized by even its own NATO members that they haven't done enough or done it fast enough. What is the sticking point for Germany? What do you think the disconnect is?
Well, this is kind of unfair, as the Germans have always pointed out. You know, behind the United States and Britain, they are actually the country which has delivered most equipment, most ammunition, most financial support to Ukraine. So the Germans feel rightly, I believe, that they are being, criticized in an unfair way. Scholz has taken his time to decide on the tank decision, whether or not to provide Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. In the end, as we know, he agreed to do so, but it took his sweet little time to do so. But that actually was appreciated by his domestic opinion, by his voters, because the Germans want their leader to reflect on what they're doing. They don't want to have someone rushing and heading into a war situation.
Right. And people forget that Germany also had a very close relationship with Russia, prior to the situation here in Ukraine. So they're doing the delicate act to keep everyone, I don't want to use the word happy, but keep everybody sort of in their lane. Do you think Germany has been successful in doing that? And what is the German-Russia relationship at this point?
Well, Germany was very dependent on particularly Russian gas and oil. They've weaned themselves off these two resources pretty well. They have found alternatives. They also were lucky that the winter was less cold than expected and feared. Relations with Putin are, of course, almost non-existent in a political sense. They are war enemies, really. But the Germans hope that after the end of the war, Russia can be re-engaged with. Russia needs to be brought into a European concert of nations. Of course, Russia, which is a non-aggressor country. But in the end, Russia will always be there. It will always be a very big and also very populous and resource-rich country, not that far away geographically from Germany. So the Germans know that in the end, Russia has to be brought back into the concert of nations. And I think Scholz and most German politicians want to keep some roads open for that for after the war.
And you mentioned energy, and obviously there's the impact of the explosion with that Nord Stream pipeline that at this point no party has taken responsibility for that. But I have to think the question is being asked by everybody, so who did it and how did it happen?
Yes, we don't know. And we know that famous article by Seymour Hersh, who points a finger at the United States and says they exploded it. And that would, of course, not be good for transatlantic relations if that was correct. But we don't know if it is correct. Others point at Russia, others point at some gangsters and mafia. And I think the Germans do not want to rock the boat. And before there is firm evidence that the United States or the Russians or someone else did it, I don't think they want to talk about that in a particularly contentious way. I'm sure Biden and Scholz will have mentioned it, but I can't see that they will have spent that much time on it.
And where do we stand with U.S.-Germany relations now here in 2023? It seems to be things are business as usual, very professional, but nothing more, nothing less than what we're going to read into this.
Well, I think in a war situation you cannot have business as usual, but the relationship between Scholz and Biden, I would say, is solid, is good. They seem to have hit it off personally. We know, for example, that between French President Macron and Scholz there is some tension. They are not always seeing eye to eye, also on a personal level. That does not seem to be the case with Joe Biden and Olaf Scholz. And I think from that point of view, their relationship is good. But transatlantic relations are under strain because of the war, because you need to get transatlantic unity, and to get 30 NATO members, 27 EU members all in one boat and always agree on the same sort of strategy. This is of course difficult, and it would be a miracle if everyone agreed and there was no dissension. There is dissension, we know, but so far, and I think much to Putin's surprise, the transatlantic alliance has kept together. They're still supporting Ukraine, and I think Putin was very surprised by that, and he still hopes that the Atlantic alliance will fracture, that they will split, and that will benefit his own war effort in Ukraine. But so far, luckily, that hasn't been the case.
Very quickly, I want to touch on the economy there in Germany and, of course, greater Europe. I was actually in Germany just a few days ago, and having walked the streets and go to the shopping malls and see the grocery stores and look at the price of eggs, it seems to me from the people I spoke with that things, yes, are elevated in price, but not at a crisis stage. And I know at the time we had an energy crisis, we had a milder winter. So it seems to me that the stress or the crisis mode is over with, but you still do have a significant amount of inflation in terms of the cost of living on the people.
Absolutely, and people do complain about it. The inflation rate is more than 8%, I believe, but the crisis atmosphere which we saw in October, November, that people believed they couldn't afford to heat their homes during the winter, that energy would become too pricey, or that oil and gas were not actually available. I think that crisis has passed. Also in November still, people expected that the Germans would face a severe recession. This doesn't seem to have come true. Right now in February, March of this year, it looks as if there won't be a recession, that the German economy will grow a little bit, but the worst economic crisis seems to be over for the time being. At least no one is in any panic mood, but inflation is still a serious problem, and people complain about that, and justifiably so.
Klaus, always good to have your insights on this. We appreciate it. Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.